Good day to our listening and viewing audience. Welcome to another edition of Marriage Encounter. I am Carson Greene, and with me is Dr. Braithwaite. We are delighted to be with you. We are always looking forward to sharing this moment, discussing issues marriage related. We have been for the last few weeks discussing the subject of the laws of boundaries. Thus far, we have spoken about three laws, Dr. Braithwaite. I know that on law number 3, which is what we started last week, we only got about halfway. That is the law of power. That is an interesting one.
Yes.
But before the law of power, we spoke about the law of responsibility. And before the law of responsibility, we had our first law.
Law of sowing and reaping.
That's right. What you sow is what you
What
reap.
you reap, that's correct.
And last week we started this interesting discussion on the law of power. I know that folks are interested in power. Before we go into that, though, we want to have a word of prayer. Doc?
Okay, let's pray, everyone. Eternal Father, gracious God, we are thankful for this privilege of sharing on Marriage Encounter. And we just want to present the families who are listening. We want to present all of those who have been following over the years. We trust that it has been a blessing, be Dr. Greene and myself, as we share today. And may the material that we share may be meaningful, may it draw somebody closer to their spouse, and may families, as a result, be drawn closer to you in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
If you are joining us for the first time, we have been looking at boundaries, and there is so much we can say on boundaries. We are going to be spending a long time on this discussion, but we are more specifically dealing with the laws of boundaries. And again, if you're joining us for the first time, think of boundaries as markers, something that you use to demark what is yours versus what is not yours. Your property is a good example. You have a perimeter, a fence around your house that says that this portion is yours, the other portion does not belong to you.
Right.
And so we are personalizing this as it relates to the marriage relationship. And one of the things we said earlier, Dr. Braithwaite, is that in a marriage, there is also this thing called boundaries, because there's some things that are yours and there's some things that are your spouse's.
Absolutely. And, taking responsibility for the things that are yours and helping your spouse take responsibility for the things that are theirs is a very important role within the context of the marital relationship. And so in the context of boundaries, we indicated, Doc, that boundaries are set up in order to protect the relationship. And you can't set up the boundary for somebody else. You can set up a boundary for yourself. When you demark your property boundary, you're demarking that boundary for you, not for the other person so much. The other person will observe the boundary, but it's your responsibility to make sure that your perimeter is properly protected. And in that event, when we look at relationships, you have to take care of you and help the other person to appreciate where the boundary for them ends as it relates to you.
That is so correct. Now, as we go into this matter of, really continue, because we started last week, the matter of power.
Yes.
We made the point that there are some things that we don't have power over.
Very important.
We discussed that last week.
Yes.
But just for a brief review, we mentioned that you do not have power to control your spouse. You do not have power to determine whether your spouse obeys you or not. You do not have power to make your spouse grow up. There are some things you have power over, but there are some things you don't have power over.
Well, and just to add, you don't have power over your spouse's attitudes and their actions. If your spouse is pouting, if your spouse is unhappy, you don't have power over that attitude or that feeling. Neither do you have power over their actions. So we could suggest, for instance, as the example we used the last time, if your spouse chooses to wear a particular outfit, you really don't have power to make them change it. You can suggest that they change it. You can encourage that they change it if you don't like it. But the person may choose not to. You don't have power to make them do things. And so we don't have power over people.
But before we go into what we have power over, just so that those listening do not get the wrong impression. We are not suggesting that in your marriage that there's a fight,
Right.
that you are saying, I do what I want and nobody tells me what to do. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about a marriage, but we're saying that in relationship, as you respect one another and as you establish boundaries, you have the awareness that a response from a spouse must be a free response. In other words, you do not force your wife or your husband to love you. We trust that your husband or your wife is truly in love with you and that they're demonstrating that love. But that should come out of a natural desire. They should want to do that. They should do that willingly. It should not be coerced. And that's the point we're making here. And if you suspect that your spouse is not loving you the way you would like your spouse to love you, I mean, you can suggest to your spouse, can we talk about this? Can we discuss this? But you can't say, listen, you don't love me and you need to start loving me and I'm going to make you do it. That's where your limitations in terms of power come in.
I just wanted to say, Doc, that, one of the foundational points of boundaries is that we understand boundaries in the context of a relationship with mutual respect and mutual love for each other. So boundaries really are most beneficial when both parties respect the boundaries.
That's right.
All right. And so, except if you don't have that, you're going to have a lot of fights.
well, I think that is going to be our rule number 4. I suspect.
Yes.
We're going to talk about respect.
There you go. Yeah.
But now, Dr. Braithwaite, we spoke last week a lot about some of the things we don't have power to do. Well, let's talk about some of the things that we have power to do.
Right.
And one of the first ones, it's rather very interesting, because incidentally, one of the things we mentioned you don't have power to do last week is that you really don't have power to make yourself a good person.
Right.
Yes. So what do you have power to do?
Right. And so, very interesting. And I'm sure, those of you in the listening audience are considering, what do I really have power to do? And so if we want to consider that question, think about it yourself. You don't have power to change anybody. But the one thing that you do possess some measure of power over, even as you mentioned last week, we don't have power to make ourselves good, but we have the power to improve ourselves.
That's right.
We have the power to see where we have our challenges and to do something about improving, enhancing, developing ourselves so that we can be better for ourselves and also better for the people who we are in relationships with.
Now, implicit in coming to that conclusion or awareness is an individual admitting his or her faults or limitations.
That's right.
And so I think that's one of the places we want to suggest you begin. You have power to admit your failures and your faults. If you don't do that, if you think you are some folks say the best thing since sliced bread. Well, if you think everything is well with you, you will just find that it's going to be difficult for your spouse to live with you.
Absolutely.
In perfect harmony.
Yeah. So
admit that you have some flaws, because all of us do. The last time I checked, we're human beings.
Yeah.
And we do have imperfections. So you have power to confess, to submit. That's an interesting word. To declare that I'm not perfect. I may have hurt you before. And you have power to repent.
Yes. Doc, again, as we look at sometimes where the emphasis is placed, a lot of times persons place emphasis on the faults of others. And then they go ahead now and attempt to fix the other person, trying to control them. You don't do this the right way, you don't do that the right way. But somebody used to say, whenever you point your finger at somebody, when you look down, you realize they're 3 pointing back at you, right? Yeah. So if you're, as would normally be the case, if your spouse has some challenges and some faults, you do as well. Acknowledging that reality, as you've shared, is very helpful in the process of building a relationship and helping us to understand the limitations of power that we really have in our own in our lives. Not the power to fix and to change and to enhance the other person, but but take care of your own areas. And that attitude alone, within the context of mutual respect for the relationship, I think it will encourage the other person, if they have some flaws, to want to address those as well.
Well, the interesting thing is, I was driving home about a week or so ago, Doc, and I tuned into Second Advent Radio. I mean, that's one of the default
Radio
radio
stations.
stations in my car. And I heard this discussion, caught my attention because it was a discussion on family life. Of course, I'm into family life, so when I hear a meaningful discussion on family life, I listen.
Yeah.
And as they were talking, it was a kind of talk show scenario, pretty much to what we're doing
Yes.
here. And one gentleman was saying that, he and his wife were having a tense relationship. And then he said somewhere along the line, he realized that his wife started affirming him. At first, he wondered whether she was, joking.
Yes.
But then after a few days, she realizes, he realized that, she's serious. Yeah. And he's praising her and saying that she appreciates him, and she's commending him for his good ways, and she took the time to identify some strengths that he has and commended him. Now, he did not stop before she started commending, being the gentleman he was.
Right.
He still had his faults, but she was now choosing to highlight some positive areas.
Beautiful.
And he said, as he heard his wife, giving recognition to some of his strengths, it caused him to stop and think, my wife really appreciates me. Let me stop being a naughty guy.
Yeah.
So in that is the acknowledgement that I've done some things that are not so good.
Right.
And that's the idea. When we can get to the point where we realize that some of our behavior is not so right, and I want to challenge all of you who are listening right now. Think of the times when you get home and you're displeased over something. Your spouse did not fulfill a promise. You expected to see something, but you saw something else. You met with disappointment. Or maybe you're just going home from work after a hard day and you are in a grumpy mood. Think of those occasions and the attitude that you have. When you persist with that attitude, what atmosphere comes over you? If, on the other hand, you should decide, I'm not feeling so well, but I'm going to do something about it. I am imperfect, but I'm going to make an effort to admit, or just to say to your wife or husband, I'm not in a good mood today, so bear with me for a little bit. That can make a big difference.
It can. And also, Doc, out of experience, when you think about your own persona, your attitude, as you address and as you deal with your spouse, it takes some real cognitive strength, some real decision making to make that decision to affirm in a moment when you don't feel like doing it, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about, you may be not in a great mood, you come home, and maybe, as you said, something that you anticipated should have been done was not done by your spouse. You can, at that moment, you can make the choice to say, I'm just so tired, of this thing when I ask you to do something and it's not done. You can choose to do that, or you can choose to say, sweetheart, I'm sure you had a rough day. And we can always get that done tomorrow. The difference between those two responses
Makes a big difference.
It's huge.
And Doc, the point I'm getting at here is that you have to do some internal work.
Yes.
To make that decision.
And to make it become a habit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going there.
Yeah.
But start with the awareness. If I persist with this particular attitude, things are going to slide downhill. And that's not what I want. So look at yourself, because we're saying one of the things you have power to do is you have power to look at yourself.
Yes.
And realize that you have some flaws, that you have some tendencies that are not so good. And when you begin to say, okay, maybe I am creating a little stress for my spouse. So let me try to change that. Let me not complain as I normally do when I get home. But let me go home and be positive. Let me go home and spend some time with my spouse, tell her that, or him, that I appreciate, and, make a difference. So start there. We're talking about the things that you have power
to do. Yeah, it's beautiful, and I think making those choices on a regular basis can help to develop a habit of being positive. And maybe as you spoke there, Doc, I thought, well, for that individual, maybe they need to recognize that their flaw is that oftentimes they're just a bit too negative. A bit too negative about just the realities of life. Maybe that is the area of their life that they need to work on. And I'm sure for many of you, you can think about it. How many times do we focus on the 10% negatives and forget the 90% positive that your spouse would generally do? You come home, things are generally going well, but on this occasion, something is not going so well. And we make that a big issue. And that becomes the area of our lives that we can change. That's where we have the power to say, what, let me stop focusing on the negatives and try my best whenever I'm faced with that situation to focus on the positive. And I also want to highlight that, because you made the point, but I want to just reiterate it. It doesn't mean that you are soft soaking, as we would say, matters and issues that may be real for the relationship. There is always a time to address matters, and you should set aside time to speak about things that are bothering you at least once per week. But in the immediate moment, try to think of, what can I do to make this relationship more meaningful?
Well, Doc, even if it means that we have to come back next week and finish this thing about power, because this discussion is so interesting. When we're talking about the matter of the things that you have power to do, and I want to go back to something you mentioned there, because you said that we focus so much on the negative sometimes. And I thought about two examples, and I kind of said, maybe it's not so wise to share this example, but I'm going to go ahead and take the chance and do it. Because we're living in the midst of a pandemic, and there is you've heard the debate over whether I should take vaccine, whether I shouldn't take it, vaccine this. And, I find as human beings, we have this tendency to focus on the negative. So that if a person takes the vaccine and dies as a result, that becomes a big deal. Everybody says, oh, such and such a person took the vaccine and they die. And people tend to concentrate on the one period,
negative,
and not consider the millions of people who have taken it and have survived. So the point I'm making is, in your own marriage, in your own relationship, we have a tendency to highlight the negative and sometimes to focus on, as you mentioned, the 10% of things that are not going so well, and we forget the 90% of things that are going so well. For your spouse may have been really outstanding in working hard, in providing for the family, in going the extra mile, in keeping the house clean and tidy, etc. And your spouse may have one little challenge with whatever it is, and you make that a big fuss. Hear what Stephen Covey says. I like to quote him every now and then. And he says, listen, there is a circle within a circle. So imagine two circles, one within the other. One is called the circle of concern, and the other, the circle of influence. Now, his philosophy is, where you put your energies, where you put your efforts, that is the circle that is going to become the bigger of the two circles.
That's right.
Most people focus on the circle of concern and not the circle of influence.
There you go.
Now, the circle of concerns are so many things that are happening in the world today. There is Omicron, that is a new variant for COVID, and most of us, like myself, what can I do about it? So if I begin to wonder that, oh, it's going to kill so many persons, and if I begin to think about what's taking place in Russia and the fact that it is not raining in one place and it is raining too many places, those are concerns, but I can't directly do anything about it. But I can do something about cheering up my spouse.
Yes.
I can do something about being positive at home, about laughing, about being helpful, about being courteous. That is the circle of influence. And what Stephen Covey says is that if I focus on the matters that I can change and leave the other matters, then that circle will eventually
become the biggest circle.
become the biggest circle.
Powerful.
And life would become so much more.
That's beautiful. It's in tandem with what Cloud and Townsend speak about, because they mention that you don't have the power to change anybody, but you have the power to influence. You have the power to influence your spouse. And, just as you spoke about the circle of influence, the influence that you can create comes out of your ability to work on yourself. So yes, your spouse can come home, after a week and say, but there's been something different about you this week. You have been so, joyous and happy, and the environment is just so much lighter. That's because you would have made a decision to say, you know what, I'm not going to be focusing, as we said, on the negatives, and I'm not going to come around with a sad and sour face and try to fix everything. I'm just going to use my influence to lift the atmosphere. And if your spouse makes that observation about you, then it's working. It's working. Your influence can lift the entire environment of that home. And I think that, it's something that we can pay more attention to, Doc, because when you think about it, and again, from personal experience, there are times when you may have had a rough day, just a rough day, and, you go home, I tend to unwind a bit by sitting down, reading through the news of the day and so forth and so on. And sometimes, I can stay in that zone for 2, 3, 4 hours, just reading and just being to myself. But sometimes I say, rather than just spending time by myself, let me go out and engage with the others. You know what I mean? Engage with my wife a little more, the children, and we sit down. And the whole atmosphere changes for me personally, because it helps me to forget about, all of the concerns that have been around, and just lifts the entire environment. But that's a choice that I make, to do something about me that has influence on the rest of the family.
And the other thing I want to mention here, Doc, is that one of the other things we can do, is we can choose to listen. Now, because if your spouse is complaining that, and I'm going to choose to say that the wife is highlighting that, the children are so much work, and then she has to cook, she has to do dishes, she has to clean, and that kind of thing. You can listen to those things, and you can say, you know what, I spend extra 2 hours at work. That is not totally necessary. But let me come home early, or let me not go play football this afternoon, and let me tidy the house for my wife.
Right.
And you do that a few days, and your wife is going to begin to say, something has happened to you, and watch the change that comes when you listen to what your spouse is saying, sometimes verbally or other times non-verbally. You can make a decision that I'm going to put some joy in my spouse's life. And if you're married for any time, you want to know the things that your spouse likes. And just try consciously to do those little extra things and see what a difference it makes.
That's right. And it does make a difference. It makes a huge, huge, huge difference. So, as we consider this whole idea of power, again, remember the distinction. There are things that you can change and there are things that you cannot change in the other person. But you can make the changes for you. Observe your surroundings, observe your situation, look at your family life, look at the way that your family relates to you. Are they withdrawn from you? Maybe do the folks tend to step on eggshells when you're around? When you get into the house, does everybody disappear into their room? What's the atmosphere like in your own home? And then once you observe that, maybe there's some things that you can change about yourself. Rather than attempting always to focus on changing the other person, which we do not have power to do, by the way. Think about yourself and think about, what can I do? How can I be more friendly? How can I be more loving? How can I adjust the atmosphere in my relationship, in my home, so that it lifts the environment and that we feel that sense of togetherness in our homes.
Well, a lot of what we're saying here ties into what we will say next week, and we want to encourage you to come, to be there, to listen, to look. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, we are willing to take them. Every now and then we stop to answer a question. Next week we're going to be talking about the law of, is it responsibility?
Respect, yes,
right.
Law of respect.
So in the meantime, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat if you're on Facebook or YouTube. Otherwise, write Marriage Encounter, that is Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. We look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to having a tremendous time next week as we go into this very interesting discussion. Just remember, we are saying that the law of power suggests that you must recognize what you have the power to do and what you don't have the power to do. Don't overstep.
That's right. Well, Galatians chapter 5, verse 23 speaks about one of the fruits of the Spirit being that of control, self-control, not controlling others. God bless you.